Hey everybody, Freddy here with another video. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into Azure Private Endpoints. And in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a process where I'm going to be using a lot of different services to get the point across. In other words, I'm going to be using Azure Machine Learning, I'm going to use Azure OpenAI, I'm going to be using Azure Storage and how those private endpoints all connect into a one hub VNet. I'm going to be also adding some things to it so that not only we're going to be using those services, but we're also going to do a VNet integration with a web app as well. So you can see how all of that works and how you can set up your Azure DNS. And also we're going to be adding another VNet as a spoke to make sure that the DNS works when you set all this up. I hope you learned something. I hope this is a video that you enjoy. And if you have any comments, as always, please leave them in the comments down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let's get to it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to explain the diagram or the architecture that we're going to be using. So the architecture that we're going to be using is this. We're going to have a hub VNet where you're going to have a subnet and all your private endpoints are going to land into that subnet. What that does is it just centralizes all your private endpoints, and so also when you create those private endpoints, the DNS is going to be updated automatically for you if you choose to do so when you create the private endpoint. And typically this is something that is best practice because you put all your private endpoints into one subnet, which is great. The only other thing that we need to worry about is other VNets, because the VNets need to be attached to this private DNS zone so that they are able to get all that information as well. So anything that is running in this subnet and spoke one will be able to resolve names because you're pointing to the same private DNS zone. There's also the ability to add DNS resolver. There's also the ability that you can use conditional forwarding if you have an on-prem environment that you have a DNS server. You can set up conditional forwarding so that anything that is being sent to this DNS can go to this private DNS zone, and everything kind of ties together. The only other thing that I want to focus on as well is the VNet integration if you have a web app. Let's say you have a web app that is taking advantage of the machine learning and also OpenAI. So that VNet integration is very crucial because this web application does not know anything about your private DNS zone unless you do this VNet integration, and now it can access this private DNS so that it's able to get to the machine learning, to the OpenAI, the storage, all of this internal information. And now what you're doing is you're keeping everything internal. You're not going out to the internet, everything stays internal. And this is the idea, right? The idea is to keep everything inside of Azure so nothing goes outside, nothing goes out to the internet, everything stays inside of Azure. So let's go ahead and start setting up the services. I'm not going to take too much time because it's not a video on how to set up the service. This is a video on how that whole thing integrates. Again, let's go ahead and get started. If you have any questions, comments, leave them in the comments section down below. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a Azure Machine Learning workspace. So we're going to go to Azure Machine Learning and we're going to click Create New Workspace. And of course, it's going to ask us for a resource group. I'm just going to put it under the DNS Demo Resource Group. I'm going to give it a name. Call it FMD Workspace. I'm going to put it in the US West. And it's going to create a new storage account, and it's going to create a key vault, and it's going to create application insights and a container registry. I'm going to leave it as none at this point. So I'm going to say networking. This one is public, so this means that you're going to be able to access it through the intranet. This one is private with an intranet outbound. So this one is if you want to have a private endpoint, but the machine learning will have access to the intranet, and this one is with private with approved outbound. This is if you want to have access to the OpenAI service, for example. So in this case, if you select this one, endpoint, it'll create a direct connection into your, in this case, Azure OpenAI service. So in other words, if you don't create this, you can still access it, but you have to access it from the VNet. So your Azure OpenAI service will have a private endpoint, but this one creates a direct connection into that service. So how do we do that? First of all, inbound. The inbound will be this connection here that goes from your workspace into the VNet itself. And then the outbound will be a connection to another service. So for example, in this case, the Azure OpenAI service. So when we go here, let's go ahead and create one. This is the inbound access. Again, resource group, I want to use the same resource group, same location. Virtual network. This is where I'm going to select the VNet hub, which is my hub VNet. And the subnet is this subnet, which is the only one I have. So again, I'm centralizing everything into one VNet, and it's going to automatically integrate into the private DNS zone. I'm going to put it in the same resource group, so it's in the same place, and it's going to create this private link .api.azure ML, ML dot. So, and then it's going to create one for the notebooks as well. So I'm going to say OK to that. That is my inbound. The outbound, if I want to create an outbound, I can call it MLS outbound PE private endpoint subscription. I need to select the resource group for my other service, like in this case, OpenAI service. So in this case, I have my OpenAI under the OpenAI resource group, and automatically picks up the resource name, which is the OpenAI endpoint, and then it says account. So at that point, I can do save on this one. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating this as the inbound and this as the outbound. Okay, next, encryption. I'm going to leave it as Microsoft Managed Key, Identity, Credential-Based Access, Review and Create. Okay, by default, the public access is disabled, and so private endpoint connection is the only way to connect to this service. And here is the private endpoint that was created, and the outbound that was created as well, going to the OpenAI. So all of this is already created, everything is done. And if we look at the private endpoint itself, we can see that it was created in the VNet hub West US and the hub subnet. So all of this, there was a network interface that was created. If we look at the IP address, it should be in the 172.17.04. Again, all of this is pretty standard. So when you look at the configuration, you're looking at something like this. The machine learning private endpoint is created in this subnet in the hub VNet. There's also an OpenAI private endpoint that will be created in this subnet as well, but right now there is a connection directly going in the outbound, going to the Azure OpenAI service. Now the storage itself, the storage account that was created, if you remember, let's go ahead and take a look at that. Here is the FMD workspace storage account that was created. Let's go ahead and look at it. There's a container called Azure ML that was created, and then the Azure Blob Store. And let's look at the file shares. There's 2 file shares that were created. So this is very important, because when we look at these private endpoints that need to be set up, there's a private endpoint that needs to be set up for Blob, because there's a container that was created. But there's also a private endpoint that needs to be created for the file shares for this section here. So you need to have these 2 private endpoints so that you're able to communicate with the machine learning. If these 2 private endpoints are not created, you're going to have an issue when you try to launch your compute inside of this service. So this we're going to leave it at this for now. So let's go ahead and go back to the machine learning. Here's my workspace. Let's go ahead and click on the work. Let's go ahead and click on this ml.azure.com to go to the studio. So now this is normal because what I'm doing is I'm trying to access this studio web URL from this workstation here. So what we need to do is we need to set up a VM here or inside of Azure, because we turned off the outside link to this service. So the only way that we can access it is through the private endpoint. So this is the reason why we're not able to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a VM inside of this subnet, inside of the Azure environment, and we should be able to get to it. So I have set up this workstation here and inside of the Azure environment. So when I go to machine learning, same idea, go to the workspace and click on this studio web URL. If DNS is working correctly, we should be able to get to it, and there it is. We are able to get to it. We can set up compute. We can pretty much run anything from there. The only other thing that we need to do is, if you remember, is the storage accounts. We need to set up the private endpoints for the storage accounts. So we can go to storage, and let's go to this workspace here. This is the one that was created automatically. So we go to containers and we see the containers and the file share, what I showed you before. So we're going to go to networking and we're going to set disabled for all public access, and we are going to leave it as Microsoft routing for now. Well, we're just going to leave it at that. Well, it created the I guess it created the private endpoints for us automatically, so we don't need to do this. So all of this is working fine. The only thing that we needed to do is disable internet access at this point. So let's go ahead and leave it at that and save. All this is good. The only other thing we have left to do is we have to do the next step, which is set up this web app. And we need to do the VNet integration, otherwise we're not going to have this network interface. And this is what we need. We need this network interface so that the traffic routes through the inside and can get to the private endpoints as well. All of this, every time you set up a private endpoint, the private DNS zone is being updated. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Private DNS zones, and here are the two private DNS that are being set up. And again, private link API Azure ML.ms. So all of this is being set up for you. So we don't need to do it manually. When you create the private endpoint, this is when it gets done. Okay, so now we are going to set up the web app. Here's the networking portion of it, where we need to say we don't need to enable public access. We can turn that off, and then we can say enable network injection, and we're going to put it into the VNet hub West US. Enable private endpoints, select the subnet, so we're going to say yes. So the private endpoint name, we're going to call it Web App Private Endpoint. Inbound subnet is going to be the Web App subnet, which is in the same VNet, even though I did not show it. So let me go ahead and show it here. Two subnets in the hub, which is the hub subnet, which is the one that I'm using for this, which I'm showing here as a subnet 1. And then I have the web app subnet, which is this subnet 2. So this web app needs its own subnet, so I'm going to put it in there. That's pretty much what that is. So I'm going to call it web app subnet Azure Private DNS Zone. So DNS is going to use that private DNS zone that I showed you. And then outbound access. The outbound access, this is the way that it's going to send data out. So we can leave it VNet integration. We can leave it on, we can leave it off. It doesn't really matter. This is just how that in and out is going to be. So I'm going to leave it off for now. Monitoring tags. Okay, done. So let's go ahead and go to the resource. Here's the web app. So let's go ahead and copy the clipboard and try to open this. So the web app you have potential to reach us has blocked your access. That is normal because again, it's set up for private endpoint. So let's go to this place here and let's try to access it from here. And there you go. Your web app is running and waiting for your content. Again, because of the private endpoints, when you try to access it from outside, it does not work. But when you try to access it from a workstation, the workstation again is in this subnet here. So that's pretty much how you're accessing and everything. When you're here, it goes through here, through that private endpoint, and you're able to get to it. When you try to access it from outside, it does not work because the intranet is being blocked. And let's check out the DNS. DNS private zones. So here we have another one, which is the Azure websites. This one was just created because of the app that we created. So when we click on this private link, there is the web app, FMD, and it has the internal IP address. So when you try to go there, it will go to this IP address internally, not externally. Okay. The only other thing that we need to look at is the rest of the design. So if you remember, we said we had some spokes, some spoke VNETs. These VNETs don't know anything about this private DNS unless you set them up so they can have access to it. So let's go to private DNS zones again. When you look at the private DNS zones, you can look at this one and you can see the virtual network links. So in this case right now it's only linked to the VNet hub. So what we need to do is we need to link it to other ones. So we're going to call it West US spoke. And you can just subscription virtual network. Here is the West US spoke. You just set that up. You can enable an auto registration, so you can click OK. So now what we're doing is we're linking this private DNS zone to the other VNet as well. So now anything that needs to resolve those names should be able, if there is a VNet peering configuration here, that should be this, anything in this VNet should be able to get to this private endpoints here. So that's what that's doing. So this is how you link to other VNets. In this case, you also can do link 2, for example, and then there's another VNet spoke in the East US. You can pretty much set up the other ones here as well. So I'm not going to do that for other ones. I'm just wanted to show you how you do it, and then at that point that is pretty much completed. This one it says that it's in progress still. Okay, so let's do a recap again. Where are we and what do we have so far? So we have a private endpoint for the Azure machine learning. When you create it, you can set up DNS. We have a private endpoint for OpenAI. We have a private endpoint for the file and the storage, and we have a private endpoint for the blob as well, going into the same subnet. When you do this, it automatically creates the private DNS zones. So when you look at the private DNS zones, you see all of them. You see the one for ML, you see one for app services, you see one for the ML notebooks, and you see one for OpenAI. So you gotta have all these. If you don't see the OpenAI, then you're not gonna be able to connect to OpenAI, because you need all of these in the DNS. So that's what we have here. Then the next thing we did is we did the VNet integration of the app service in a different subnet, because it has to be in a different subnet. That VNet integration, but because it's in the same VNet, it's using the same DNS private DNS zone. We also did the integration with other VNets, where you have to attach the DNS zones to those VNets. So make sure you do that if you're going to be using it from a different VNet. So all of that has been done. If we go to the application the web app. Again, I can't do it from here. I have to do it from here. So let's go here. This, if I go to my app service, if I go to my application, I have the option to SSH into the application itself. So I already have one here running. So this is my SSH connection, and what I want to do is I want to make sure that I can resolve names to IP addresses, internal IP addresses. So I'm going to NS lookup the OpenAI service, and I can do that. When I do an NS lookup, I can see that is using the canonical name or CNAME OpenAI-FMD private link.openai.azure.com. So when I use this name right here, then it's translating to the private link, which in essence will translate to the internal IP address. So now my web app is able to talk to OpenAI via the private link connection or the private endpoint. Same thing with the storage, same thing with the ML service. All of that is pretty much working the way that is supposed to be working. This is how everything communicates. So when we go back here, you saw that the app, this VNet integration is the one that sets the DNS. The app itself is running in a container, so it's getting the DNS information from the VNet, and the VNet is using the private DNS zones, and this is how everything is able to translate to IP addresses. I know this was a long video, and I hope that everything that I just explained makes sense, but if it doesn't, please leave a comment in the section down below, and if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them. If you have any suggestions, please also let me know. I hope you learned something, and I will see you on the next one.